This is The Toss-Up, where we take a look at some of the topics facing the world of sports and then we dive deeper. Whether it's your best friend's fantasy team or the future of college athletics, we're just trying to expand the conversation. We just want to look at the topics that keep you tuned in to the beautiful world of sports. What has a king, a unicorn, a freak from Greece, a loudmouth dad, and a group of warriors that runs the place? Easy, the NBA. Fortunately for the United States, that loudmouth dad is in Lithuania coaching his sons to get beat by 40-plus points every game so we can focus on the basketball instead of the sidelines for now in the NBA. We're almost to the midway point of the season, and the NBA is still the drama-ridden league we all love. Chris Paul reportedly led some of his teammates through a secret passageway in the Staples Center to ambush Blake Griffin and Austin Rivers in the Clippers locker room. And the Cavaliers held a players meeting where Isaiah Thomas, among others, reportedly accused Kevin Love of faking an illness during their blowout loss to the Oklahoma City Thunder, and players seem to be trying to roundhouse kick each other game in and game out. But there have also been plenty of achievements and good basketball so far. LeBron James became the youngest player ever to reach 30,000 career points. Rookie Lauri Markkanen became the fastest player in NBA history to score 100 three-pointers. And despite the early loss of star Gordon Hayward, the Celtics have cemented their spot as one of the top teams in the league. All of this action, and we still have half of the season left to be played. Can there possibly be more drama around the corner? Will there be more records broken? Will the Lakers have to deal with the return of LeVar? For now, we'll have to find out and wait. Hello everyone, I'm Jacob Vincent, and joining me on the panel this week is IDS reporter Cameron Drummond, co-host of the WIUX's Four-Pointer, Murphy Wheeler, and co-sports director of IUS TV, Austin Matricardi. And guys, we're talking the NBA this season, but let's just get right into it. Most surprising team, what do you guys got?
For me, it's the New Orleans Pelicans. I know it's a team that hasn't historically been successful when it comes to the postseason or when it comes to making runs into the playoffs, into the deep rounds. But when you have players like DeMarcus Boogie Cousins, Anthony Davis, Rajon Rondo, Alvin Gentry is doing a heck of a job coaching that team, and they're all the way up into the top 8 in the Western Conference right now.
Yeah, I think it's the Celtics, honestly. I think coming into the season, they had Gordon Hayward. We didn't think he would get injured right away. And I honestly thought, maybe they could go against the Cavs and maybe give them a run in the playoffs and maybe even beat them. And then when he went down, I got a little nervous and thought maybe not. Maybe they'll fall back to 4th or 5th in the East. But Brad Stevens has coached that team to the point where they're at now, where they're first in the Eastern Conference. They look really good. Kyrie Irving is an MVP candidate for sure. And they're young guys. Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, they're stepping up and doing big things for them. And their guards off the bench have been really impressive to me as well. Marcus Smart and Terry Rozier are just dogs off the bench. They give them so much energy on both ends of the floor. They've been huge for them. They need a presence down low alongside Al Horford to be successful, but I still think they have a good chance to beat the Cavs in the playoffs.
Well, for me, it's got to be the Indiana Pacers. After they traded away Paul George over the summer, people were kind of low on them. Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis were considered to be a measly return for a player of George's caliber, and they've just come out and exceeded all expectations, even with a player like Miles Turner, who was expected to kind of be the leader of their, youth revolution. He's been missing a lot of time with injury, and Oladipo's broken out as a star. He's been great for them. He's led them to the 6th spot in the East is where they're sitting right now. Domantas Sabonis has shown that he can be a valuable player moving forward, and they've also got guys like Lance Stephenson who come in and play their roles and help their team win as well. So I think that Indiana's exceeded expectations has been a surprise for me.
Yeah, I like the Pacers, actually. I think that's a good answer because we'll talk about Oladipo a little bit later. His game has been, he's stepped it up big time this year. And I really like Sabonis as well. Right now, it looks like the Pacers won that trade.
So we've talked some most surprising teams. Let's look at the other end of the spectrum, most disappointing teams.
Yeah, this is a little difficult. There's a lot of disappointing teams, but I think right now it's the Cavaliers. I think I watched their game against the Spurs the other night, which they lost in San Antonio, I believe, and their defense is atrocious. It is absolutely atrocious. I cringe watching their defense. Isaiah Thomas, I know he's never been that good. as a perimeter defender, but you can tell he's not 100% yet from his hip injury. He's looked absolutely awful defensively and offensively. He's not the same player. I mean, this is a guy that carried Boston in the fourth quarter so many times last year. And I thought the other night they can't have him in here late in the fourth quarter. He's not giving them what they need, and he's giving up so much on the defensive end. They don't have a post presence on defense either. Tristan Thompson, his head's in the clouds right now. I don't know if it's the Kardashian curse or not, but he just has not looked like the same player. And Kevin Love, we already know, he's not the interior defender that they need either.
And you know what, Murphy? I think that the Cavs have been pretty disappointing, and part of that was because of Isaiah Thomas's injury that he had last season. You know, he had that surgery over the summer, and they came back and they brought in Derrick Rose to be their starting point guard. And in the year of our Lord 2018, that's not a good strategy. You don't want Derrick Rose playing a lot of minutes at point guard. So I think that that's part of the reason why the Cavs have been so disappointing. For myself personally, I think that the most disappointing team that I've seen has been the Oklahoma City Thunder. They were kind of expected to come out and be one of the title contenders for, you know, the entire NBA. And, you know, they got these guys. They brought in Melo, they brought in Paul George, and they kind of had some trouble figuring out how to play together early in the season, which could have been expected. But obviously those expectations were set very high for this team. They still have plenty of time to turn the corner, and I think they may be starting to do that as Melo has kind of accepted his role as more of an off-ball player, a three-point shooter. So it'll be interesting to see how the second half shakes out for them, but as of right now, I'd say that their season's disappointing.
One thing I will say about the Thunder, I wasn't totally taken aback by their slow start. One, because we did maybe figure it was going to take those three guys, Westbrook, George, and Anthony, to get it together a little bit. But I'm starting to really wonder if you can build a championship caliber team around Russell Westbrook just because of his usage rates and things like that. And I don't know if Paul George and Carmelo Anthony were the stars that you needed to put around him. I don't know if they were the right fit or not.
Yeah, and I mean, that's probably a problem for the Thunder just because George and Melo are both kind of that alpha dog. We know Carmelo. You know Carmelo Anthony. He wants to go out and he wants to take 40 shots a game. He has since he came into the league, and despite the fact that he's getting up there in years and he's getting closer to the end of his career, he still wants to be that guy. If he's going to step down and take a role like I believe he's starting to, that's going to help out the Thunder a lot. So with Russell Westbrook, you kind of have to play a very specific style of basketball, and you have to have the exact right players to fit around him. And I don't know if Oklahoma City really has that, even just not Paul George and Carmelo Anthony, just from the top down.
I want to jump in on that. Let's stick with the Thunder for a little bit because the starting five, they have a lot of talent in their starting five. Obviously, they have Melo, Paul George, and Russell Westbrook. But then once those five come off, you bring in the supporting cast, there really isn't much there.
Yeah, they've given up a lot of their supporting cast over the offseason, and we kind of knew they were a little thin anyway last year. They struggled with finding pieces to put around Westbrook. He carried that team last year, and that's why he ended up averaging a triple-double and winning MVP. So, yeah, I know they're still trying to figure out a roster to put around Westbrook, like we said. And, honestly, a guy that is really valuable to them that nobody talks about is Steven Adams.
Oh, yeah.
He is unbelievably valuable to that team because he is one guy that knows how to play with Westbrook. When I watch him play, he is always in the right positions offensively. He knows where to be so he can get that pass from Westbrook, and that's where a lot of Westbrook's assists come from. He finds Adams, who's always in the right position.
Then you begin to question can Steven Adams be someone who helps players who come into the Thunder acclimate to playing with Russell Westbrook? And if that can't happen in the near future, then not only do you lose the possibility of winning with Russell Westbrook to Oklahoma City, you possibly may lose Russell Westbrook as well.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at Steven Adams, that's one of my favorite guys to watch. He's so good. He's developed so much since he came out of Pitt and out of New Zealand. He's just been great for the Thunder. Very underrated player, in my opinion. But you look at last year's roster, you talked about how they were kind of thin, and that's why Russell Westbrook did the things that he did, because he had to. You have to remember that roster was built around Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant. Yeah. And when you lose arguably the second greatest player in the world, your roster's going to be a little thin. That roster was built to augment two superstars, not one. And then this year, it's kind of bounced back a little bit just because of the additions of George and Melo. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of moves Sam Presti makes. He's always looking for players. He's always looking to make moves and improve his team, and that's why he's one of the better GMs in the NBA.
All right, so we got a new segment here on the toss-up, buy or sell. First one, we're going to start off with Minnesota as a playoff contender.
You know, I don't know if I'm going to buy it just yet. I think they need a couple of years. I think you need a little bit more experience for Karl Towns and Andrew Wiggins. They haven't even been to the playoffs yet in their career. Give them some time. But Jimmy Butler is changing the culture in Minnesota. Absolutely. I think right now, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit later, he's probably in the top 5 in my list of MVP candidates. I think he is absolutely carrying that team defensively. He's changed the culture defensively there, and even though Towns and Wiggins still struggle at times defensively, he's been so good for them. I think you just give them a year or two, and they'll be right there at the top of the West. And they are already there in the standings, but I think they'll make some noise in the playoffs.
But you talk about, Minnesota and having the presence of someone like a Jimmy Butler, but you also have the idea that they're almost like a Chicago North now. You have Tom Thibodeau there, you have Taj Gibson
Yeah.
there, you have Jimmy Butler there to complement these young pieces that they have. And Tom Thibodeau, for all the flack he got in Chicago with the way he handled the Derrick Rose situation, he's a hell of a coach.
Yeah.
And he's doing things with that team at a rate that I don't think too many people around the league expected.
Looking at the Minnesota Timberwolves, I can see why you'd be tempted to sell. I kind of want to buy the Timberwolves. I mean, you look at them, they've got a pretty talented roster. Thibodeau's a great coach, just like you just said. It all depends on the matchup for me. I mean, you look at them right now, they're hanging around the 3-4 spot, going back and forth with the San Antonio Spurs. I think that the Timberwolves are more than capable of beating, say, the Houston Rockets or the San Antonio Spurs in a playoff series. I don't think by any means they can beat the Warriors.
Right.
But I think that, they're obviously not an elite team yet. They might be trending that way. They've got some great young stars. But right now, I think they're a pretty solid team. They could make some noise in the playoffs given the right matchup.
And we talked about the Thunder being thin off the bench. The Timberwolves are also pretty thin. I think their top options are Gorgie Jang and a 37-year-old Jamal Crawford and Tyus Jones. I mean, I don't know if that's your answer right now. So they need to do a little bit of roster building still, I think.
Yeah, 37-year-old Jamal Crawford's better than any of us will ever be at basketball.
Oh, that's very true.
All right, next one we got the 2017 NBA draft class. You had Jason Tatum, Lonzo Ball, just to name a few. And Jason Tatum started off very well for the Celtics. He's dropped off a little bit. And Lonzo Ball has been pretty consistent throughout. Buy or sell on them?
Yeah, I'm going to buy this class. I think they've looked good. The top of the class, a few of those guys are taking some time to develop. Obviously, Markelle Fultz. I don't know what they're doing with him in Philadelphia right now. His shot looks awful. So hopefully he figures that out. And hopefully he doesn't turn to the next Anthony Bennett. But Lonzo's had his flashes. Jason Tatum, I thought, has looked really good so far for Boston. Some guys that, aren't getting as much attention as I think they should, though, are guys like Donovan Mitchell in Utah, Dennis Smith in Dallas, Kyle Kuzma with the Lakers. I think he's been more impressive than Lonzo has for the Lakers so far. But Donovan Mitchell's a guy I really like. I think he's a guy that could turn into a sort of Damian Lillard type player. He's just as athletic. Lillard's a very athletic player as well. If he can learn how to score off the dribble and get his ball handling skills a little bit better, I think he could be a very similar player to Lillard.
Well, Murphy, I'm going to buy too for a very similar reason. There have been a lot of good contributors that have come out of this draft so far. You listed a whole bunch of them off there, and I can completely agree with you on all those guys. But one guy you didn't mention was Lauri Markkanen in Chicago. I think that he's a tremendous player. He was looked at before the draft, and it was an easy comparison. Oh, he's a European guy. He's tall. He can shoot. He's Dirk. And I mean, so far, it's not looking like he's too far off. I mean, he's a big, tall European guy that can shoot. He can also play, he can handle the ball a little bit. He can pass the ball. He can do a lot of different things for the Bulls, and that pick was kind of frowned upon immediately. But then it didn't take too long for Lowry to prove himself as a potential future franchise player.
And let's not only, focus on the United States team's top list. Let's look at what's going on in Toronto with our own Indiana alum OG Anunoby being able to contribute to a Raptors team that's right up there in the top of the Eastern Conference with Boston, making an instant impact for them.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of players that have had really good roles as role players this year. Another guy that comes to mind is Jordan Bell with the Warriors. He's hurt right now, but I think he's their best option at center. And I know they're going to probably put out the lineup of death with Draymond at center, and they'll put Andre Iguodala in there in the playoffs a lot of times. But Jordan Bell, I think, could be very valuable to this team down the road and really play a good spot there in their center position.
All right, so we're about midway through this show, midway through the season. Coming up after the break, our panel will discuss some of the NBA's top performers thus far, and we'll take a look at the Hoosiers in the NBA. Stick with us. Welcome back to the toss-up. So far, we've discussed some of the teams around the NBA, but now let's shift the focus to some individuals around the league. Before we dive in, let's go into Austin for a look at the Hoosiers in the NBA.
Thanks, Jacob. Over the last 70 years, Indiana basketball has had 60 alumni play in the NBA, with 8 of them seeing minutes so far this season. Let's start with the longest tenured NBA Hoosier, Eric Gordon. Coming off a season where he was named the NBA's 6th Man of the Year, Gordon hasn't slowed down a bit. The Houston combo guard is currently averaging just under 20 points per game, but not because of his three-point shooting. Gordon's having arguably his best season of his career from within the three-point arc, hitting 55% of his shots. A pair of veterans have struggled with injuries this season. Noah Vonleh missed the start of the season due to injury and has struggled to reclaim his spot in the rotation since in Portland, but is posting some of the best numbers of his career in limited time, including a career-high field goal percentage of 50%. In Charlotte, Cody Zeller has only played in 19 games due to a torn meniscus that he suffered in early December. There doesn't appear to be a timetable for his return to the Hornets at the moment. After the high of Yogi Mania, you'd think that Mavericks point guard Yogi Ferrell would regress back to the mean, but he's had a solid season for Dallas. Ferrell's averaging 10 points on 45% shooting and is at 40% of his shots from downtown. OG Anunoby has shown promise during his rookie season, as Cameron mentioned earlier. He's slowly worked his way into a larger role with the Raptors and has started 34 games. Anunoby has the 16th best plus-minus in the entire league right now with a plus 235. He's sandwiched between a couple of guys you've probably heard of, Russell Westbrook and Chris Paul, and he's still a lockdown defender. Earlier this season, Anunoby held MVP candidate James Harden to 8 of 25 shooting from the field and a 3 for 11 mark from downtown. And last but certainly not least is Victor Oladipo. Oladipo has become a star since returning to Indiana to lead the Pacers. He's having the greatest season of his career in pretty much every way possible. He's shooting 40% from behind the three-point line. He's scoring 17 points per game, and he's led the Pacers to a relatively unexpected 6th place standing in the Eastern Conference. It only took 5 years, but Oladipo is finally capitalizing on the potential that the Orlando Magic saw when they picked him 2nd overall. And in doing so, he's being rewarded with his first All-Star nod of his career. He'll be the first Indiana alum to play in the All-Star game since Isaiah Thomas made the team for his 12th straight time back in 1993. Back to you, Jacob.
Thank you, Austin. So let's just get back right into it. We're starting off with another segment, staying with the NBA. We have the lightning round now. So start off, Rookie of the Year. Who you got?
Yeah, I think it has to be Ben Simmons. We haven't seen a 6'10" point guard as versatile as he is with a baby hook shot that's totally lethal in a long time. I mean, he's kind of like a Magic Johnson type player, to be honest with you. And I'm not saying Ben Simmons is the next Magic Johnson by any means, but he is a very talented player. Now, what is a little concerning about Ben Simmons, how much the 76ers struggle without Joel Embiid on the floor. But I don't think there's really any competition right now for Rookie of the Year.
Well, I don't agree, Murph. I'm going to go with Donovan Mitchell. You talked about him earlier. He's a guy that a lot of people are really starting to like. He's a great player for the Jazz, and he's kind of stepped into a very large role for them quickly in his career, much quicker than expected. Ben Simmons kind of has some help around him. He's got Joel Embiid. He's got Dario Saric. The list goes on and on of former top 5 draft picks because the 76ers have been bad for God knows how long. But, I mean, you look at the Jazz, and they lost Gordon Hayward, and they've kind of had to hit the reset button. And they've been without Rudy Gobert all year. So his second-best player might be Ricky Rubio. And if your second-best player is Ricky Rubio and you're putting up the numbers that Donovan Mitchell is, you have to give him the nod.
Yeah, I'll agree with Austin on this one for the simple fact that the Utah Jazz are a worse situation right now compared to the Philadelphia 76ers, as crazy as that is to hear. Because when you lose a guy like Gordon Hayward, not only what he meant to the team, but what he meant to the city being a star player there for so many years, they were looking for someone to kind of jump in and fill his hole right away, and that's something that Mitchell's been able to do.
What about Defensive Player of the Year?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Al Horford of the Celtics. He has been – the stats just don't tell the whole story for Al Horford. I'm glad he got that All-Star nomination because he totally deserves it. He has been the anchor for that Celtics defense all year. He's been so valuable for them that he can guard inside, bang down low, and step outside and guard some of the more versatile players in the NBA. I think the Celtics had the best defense in the league, and I think Horford has been the main reason why. So I think he has to be Defensive Player of the Year.
It's easy for me. Al Horford, best player, best defense, done. End of conversation.
I'll go a slightly different route, and I'll go back to my discussion of the New Orleans Pelicans earlier this year, and I'll go with DeMarcus Boogie Cousins, because when you have a guy that's getting 14, 15 rebounds a game to go along with a couple blocks, he's even averaging 2 steals so far this season. He kind of can do it all in a big man role, and even though he does have help from Anthony Davis, I think that what he's doing, putting up stat lines with 40, 20, and 10, is something that should be rewarded.
I think with the Pelicans, Davis alters more shots at the rim than Cousins does. So I think I would maybe, if I gave it to anybody, I would give it to anybody on the Pelicans. I would give it to Davis over Cousins. But they've both been really good. They both have looked really good in that 2 big man lineup for them.
Who you got for Coach of the Year?
Coach of the Year, I think it's Brad Stevens. I'm going to go with a lot of Celtics here just because they're going above and beyond expectations now that Gordon Hayward's been injured. But Stevens has shown that he's one of the best basketball minds in the NBA, maybe just second to Greg Popovich of the Spurs. And I think Popovich could make a claim for himself as well. I mean, they've been without Kawhi Leonard. So I think if you gave it to Stevens or Popovich, I think that would be good.
I got Popovich. He's doing more with less than Brad Stevens, so it's easy.
I'll second Murph and go with Brad Stevens as well, just for the fact of it's easy for a coach like Popovich, who's been in this game for so long, to do more with less, but Stevens is actually rising up to the expectations I've been set on his team each year since arriving in Boston.
All right, the last part of the lightning round, the MVP race. Who you got midway through?
This one's a little difficult for me. I think it's a little bit of a toss-up right now, but I think James Harden is the guy. I think the Rockets have shown that they are going to be a huge threat to the Warriors in the playoffs this year. I think Harden's a big part of that. Now, I know they obviously added Chris Paul, but they've played so well together. I think Harden is the leader at this point. Now, with LeBron James, I think he's right there, and I'm going to go on my Cavalier soapbox here again. But I don't think, with all the turmoil surrounding the Cavaliers right now, LeBron has to be the guy to step up, take control of all these egos, and he hasn't done it yet. And maybe he will. Maybe they'll flip the switch eventually, but he hasn't done that yet. So I don't think I could give him MVP, even though he's played great.
LeBron James is my MVP. He's dragging the Cleveland Cavaliers to a top 2 seed because they're a bad team without him. We'll probably see that next year. This Cavaliers roster is very bad without LeBron. Give me Bron as the MVP.
When you think about the Houston Rockets roster, as Murphy was talking about, it's not James Harden complimenting Chris Paul. It's the other way around. The only reason why the Rockets are into the top 2 in the Western Conference is because of Chris Paul's presence. But that team is nothing without James Harden. He's my MVP pick.
All right, so now let's transition over a little bit. Let's just talk a little playoff action. So you mentioned those top 2 teams in both leagues. And the Cavs, they've been dropping off a little bit. They've lost a few games. Are they able to make into the playoffs? And who else might be able to make it into the playoffs?
Yeah, I think we talk every year. We have the same conversation every year that the Cavaliers, are they starting to are they starting to have that eventual downfall that we all expect from them? And they always turn it on when it comes to the playoffs. And I'm not really expecting anything less out of them, but I do think they'll get a lot of competition that they haven't had in a long time in the Eastern Conference. I think the Celtics are right there. I think the Raptors are right there. In the Western Conference, I think the Houston Rockets are the best team in the Western Conference other than the Golden State Warriors in the last few years. I think they're going to give them the most competition they've seen in the last few years. And I think the Rockets are just a team that is built to beat the Warriors. That's what they've been trying to do. They have guys like Luke Mbamute, P.J. Tucker, these guys that can guard just about any position on the floor, and that's how you beat the Warriors. You can guard anybody on the floor.
For me, it's the Oklahoma City Thunder. I mean, you look at them, and so far this year they've played up and they've played down to their competition. They've beat teams. They beat the Warriors. They've beat the Rockets. They beat the Spurs. And they've also lost to some lower tier teams. They've lost to a bad Jazz team, so on and so forth. So I think that once it gets to playoff time, granted Oklahoma City makes it there, and they absolutely should. There would be a tremendous collapse if they didn't. I think that they have a chance to make some noise. They have the talent that's necessary to go and make a deep playoff run. Maybe they don't beat the Warriors in a 7-game series, but I'm certain that they can compete with anybody in the West.
I look at the Eastern Conference, and we talk about how the Cavaliers have struggled defensively, and they're not the same team that they've been the past few seasons. So I'm looking for kind of a lower-seeded Eastern Conference team to make some noise in the playoffs. Maybe a Miami, if Milwaukee could figure their coaching situation out. Maybe the Bucks. Maybe even the Washington Wizards, who seem to inexplicably struggle at times, yet rise up to play really well in certain games. I'm looking for someone to knock out Cleveland early and maybe make a surprise run to the conference finals against either Boston or Toronto.
So you mentioned the big dogs, obviously, but there's still one more thing to mention. Who's going to win the title this year?
I mean, are we gonna kid ourselves and tell us that it's not the
No.
Warriors? I mean, let's be honest, guys. They're a mega team. I mean,
All right,
not just a super team.
Let me ask you a different question then. If we're all in consensus with the Warriors, how do you beat them?
You build a team like I said earlier, like the Rockets have done. You have to put a lot of versatile guys together, guys that can guard any position on the floor, guys that can play fast, because that's how the Warriors like to play. And if you can push them out, honestly, I don't know how you beat the Warriors, though, when it comes down to it, because you see the Rockets beat them in these regular season games. They're playing like it's the playoffs. Mike D'Antoni's coaching like it's the playoffs. Meanwhile, Steve Kerr's playing Nick Young in the fourth quarter. I'm sorry, when we get to the playoffs, Nick Young's not going to be in there in the fourth quarter unless he's going off like he sometimes does. But I just don't see how you can beat this Warriors team whenever they throw out a lineup like the lineup of death and they run that pick and roll where Stephen Curry and Kevin Durant play off of each other, and you can have Durant rolling to the rim or you can have him pop out for a three. It's tough. I don't really know.
You look at the Warriors, and obviously they're one of the greatest teams of all time. I think that in order to beat them, you have to have star players who play the best series of their careers. Like if you're Oklahoma City, Russell Westbrook, Paul George, Melo all have to have some of their best career performances. Houston, James Harden, and Chris Paul have to play out of their minds. That's the only way. I mean, you have to be perfect every single game for the entire game if you're going to beat the Warriors.
The approach is pretty simple to beating the Warriors. You have to build a team that resembles the Warriors, you have to play better than them in each game, and you have to get very, very lucky. Houston is the closest team in the Western Conference to replicating that formula, but if they can get the luck, maybe it goes 7 games, but are we going to sit here and really tell the viewers at home that the Warriors aren't going to win the NBA championship?
It's going to be tough, that's for sure. Instead of final thoughts this time, we're going final takes, so just a little bit shorter. Does anybody have any final takes?
Well, I mean, I've been kind of griping about the Cavaliers all night, and I think they are on that eventual downfall, down from grace a little bit. You know, they've gone to the finals the last however many years, 3 years is it now? And I just don't see it with this team. There's something really off with them. They're going to have to make some kind of change at the trade deadline, make a move, or make some lineup changes like Tyronn Lue has said he's going to do. But there's just some guys that aren't on the same page, that's for sure. I don't know if Kevin Love is at times. Isaiah Thomas definitely isn't. J.R. Smith has been a non-factor for them for a while. So I don't really know what to expect from the Cavs.
I want to look at the Chicago Bulls. It appears that Gar Forman and John Paxson have kind of accidentally backed their way into having a pretty nice young team. They didn't do it on purpose, that's for sure. But they have some great young pieces. Chris Dunn, Lauri Markkanen, Zach LaVine. They've got a pretty good pick coming up in this year's draft. So look for the Bulls in the next few seasons to rise up and be a playoff contender.
We've talked about the lineup of death that the Warriors can offer you and how they're dominating all things NBA right now. We're seeing the seeds of that in Minnesota. Give it maybe 4 or 5 years. If they can keep all those pieces intact and Tom Thibodeau keeps his head and keeps his job as a head coach, watch out for the Timberwolves.
Yeah, I like that thought, and I think, like you said, give him a few years, and Jimmy Butler is the centerpiece of that team. I still think he is possibly a top 3 MVP candidate right now. I think he's been that valuable to Minnesota. So keep an eye on them in the next few years.
All right, well, that's going to do it for the show this week. Be sure to continue the discussion on our Twitter page at IUSTV Sports and on Facebook at IUSTV Sports. You can always give any suggestions for the show and ask any questions that you might have. Toss it up. Find out if we'll catch it. We'll see you next time.